How do you see that the teaching of the present moment is central to the Christian tradition?
Well, sufficient for the day is its own evil, Jesus said. Well, that's only for beginners. Sufficient for the present is the present moment. Because in the teaching of the masters of that idea in our tradition, there's the sense of the present moment as a sacrament. That is to say, whatever the present moment contains, God is communicating grace appropriately, with more or less intensity, depending on the capacity of the listeners and those who are participating. And so the present moment, there is only the present moment. But this gets into some of the more higher states of consciousness where time and eternity are the same. Panikkar develops these ideas philosophically better than anybody I know. But the ancient ones like De Caussade and Brother Lawrence, this is all about the present moment, which contains virtually your entire past or whatever your future might be or not be. So, and that's the only place God is because He's eternal and not limited to any time. So to move into the present moment is to move into all time or no time, which is eternal, whatever the categories are that we don't know what they are until we get there, I guess. But Eckhart Tolle has a special grace as far as I can see. I think he's very solid. He's one of those people, a number of people now who claim to be enlightened, that is to say, always in the presence of God. They must be in the present moment. So that's what the Course in Oprah was, I believe, is all in the present moment, how to get there, how to stay there, and all that. But of course you can't do either of those without grace. A lot of grace. And the non-dual is just another word for what these people mean by enlightenment. But all the masters say, if you want to desire, if you want to strive for enlightenment, you're on the wrong path because you're going in the wrong direction. Enlightenment, you've already got it. So the proper relationship is to consent, which is what we're trying to start people off with. Consent to the presence and action. It's meant to move out of the divine therapeutic period of centering prayer. The walls fall away and the whole of life becomes part of the teaching. And that's, as far as I can see, the meaning of the devotion to the present moment.
Thank you.
Do you practice that?
Well, I try to, but I'm not very good at it.
Well, how do you go about it, Thomas, in your own life of being alert to the present moment?
Well, I guess it just happens after a while. If you do it yourself, you're going to lose that because the actual presence of God is effortless, because to strive is it can't avoid a certain amount of egoic factors. And when the ego is involved, even when it doesn't dominate our consciousness, is an obstacle to being in the present moment. The ego wants to be where it wants to be. It has its own agenda. So I think that all the masters are suggesting, you've read them yourselves, that let go. So the method of centering prayer itself, if people did it correctly and had a practice, several practices like repeating a mantra during the day, not during the time of prayer, because that's for cultivating silence. But I think the reason is insofar as you can give a cause to grace, reason is that we already were in God's mind and therefore present at creation. And then have come finally into a body, or have been sent here by the creative action of God. And so we really know who we are at the deepest level. But we're not aware that we know this. We're aware of our desires and the illusions of the false self that we built up as infants, because we had no idea of who God was at that point. And security and power and love needs made it essential to gratify them and as soon as possible. But the trouble with pleasure is, there's nothing wrong with it, is that it's impermanent. So this is a great insight the Buddhists have provided. You can almost say impermanence is God's first name. This doesn't mean that he's not transcendent. It means that God is both transcendent and creatively in relationship to us. The Trinity is a relationship with God that he's freely entered into and called us, as Panikkar says, into existence as a thou, so that without us, God is not a father. It's us that make him a father. If we weren't there, there'd be nothing else. So, seems to me, Eckhart is saying, who seems to be the best of all the Christian mystics that I've come across, that there's the aspect of the divine essence that is absolutely transcendent, so it doesn't contradict that traditional teaching of the Church and the Jewish religion especially, which doesn't want any kind of statement that we become God or can be guys. And that's true, but it's not the whole truth. The other part is that God decided to create, which is a relationship. And that because it's not God, it's bound to be imperfect. There's no surprise about that. So the made in the image and likeness of God, we're supposed to become through our experience of this veil of tears. What God is, namely totally alone and totally social at the same moment, totally transcendent and totally accessible. So there's the creative God and the uncreated God at the same time. And our problem is that we like to think of God as one thing at a time. And that's not God. That's why concepts don't describe things. And why... And if you've read Cynthia Bourget's rather remarkable book on the Trinity, using Gurdjieff's three laws thing, she has this idea, if I followed her correctly, that there was nothing but God, but beyond any concept of being or non-being. It's just God, who is always becoming once he enters into creation, but in his essence never changes. So it's this need to stretch our minds beyond its limits to see that God is everything at once. And so he's infinitely one and infinitely diverse as creator. But as the transcendent one, he remains the divine essence. So Eckhart says that the ground of being, everything is emerging from that, even the Trinity. And so it's important to give God plenty of space and to think big of God, and that you can never say one thing about God without saying the opposite, because he's both at once. And the insight that Gurdjieff had was that, if I understood him correctly, and at least as Cynthia interprets him, there's the affirmative statement of a great ideal. And this is typical of us. We want to become enlightened, we want to become who we are, we want to become all things to all people, we want to save humanity, all this marvelous stuff, which is a good place to start. But it's not where God is. And so when we have a great ideal that we commit ourselves to, like a marriage or religious life, or some great ministry or apostolate, this isn't it yet, until it's confronted by negative circumstances, which we interpret as problems and try to get rid of as fast as we can, whereas the affirmation and its challenge by circumstances and life and the working on our own inner obstacles to grace, when that is fully accepted, consented, here's the value of the present moment. That's the moment when one accepts the problem and is the creative way in which one moves to, God can move us to a new level of consciousness where both positive and negative have been reconciled, become one, and we see them not as opposites but as enrichments of each other. So, wonderfully broad-minded view, so that I think of so many times where I've had a great ideal or trying to do something, and is contradicted by events or nobody else is interested. So you say, "Oh, well, hell with this! I'm going to give it up," and so. Whereas it's not a problem from God's perspective, but a challenge, the means of enabling us through the struggle between two opposites. The double bind is another name for it. One is thrust into a level of consciousness that is beyond the limits of the other two. Now, Cynthia applies that to the Trinity, which is very interesting. That God had a double bind, that he had this infinite goodness, didn't need anybody, but on the other hand, he was lonesome. Because goodness wants to give itself away, but there has to be somebody to give away to. And so this pressure built up in such a way that the Trinity had to come out of its nothingness, and so that to spread its goodness infinitely. And this led to the Trinity, where the Father, infinite possibilities, coming to consciousness in the Son as an interior, not an exterior, right? And then overflowing through the Son into all creation. And I suppose that Eckhart would say, well, consciousness there's only one consciousness, and perhaps that's the ultimate reality, which is God consciousness, or a transcendent consciousness that is beyond what we understand by God. That which is not being and being at the same time, or beyond either of those concepts. And that, so there's the Father as the positive capacity, and the Son challenging that by becoming all that the Father is, and the Spirit then is the creative love that emerges from this positive and challenge of the Father and the Son. And in God, this is delightful, I guess. But when this happens in our lives, it's an invitation to become like God. And so there are no problems in that sense, but challenges that if we accept the problem, grace moves us to a new level or a new stage in consciousness. And the consciousness is one with each creature or nature participating according to its capacity in that consciousness. But the evolution of consciousness seems to be the purpose of the spiritual life, and the present moment contains a creative possibility, like the Word of God is the immersion into actuality of infinite nothingness, but that is also infinite possibilities. So there's no limit to what God can do, and so it seems to me that these thoughts of some of the Christian mystics, but they're present in the other traditions too, as far as I can see, are mind expanding. And to bring our rest of us in line with that takes takes a few experiences of the three laws that Gurdjieff, with great insight, seems to have perceived. And Cynthia, I'm amazed at the wisdom of that contribution to the theology of the Trinity. In other words, God had this problem of being infinitely alone and nothing and needing nothing, and the creative urge of being, of sharing his goodness infinitely with other beings. So that's why we can safely say, it seems to me, from a metaphysical point of view, that God is bringing us into those dispositions of divine life that are, of course, forgiveness, compassion, love of others, and sense of the equality of everybody, so that and the responsibility for everybody, so that everything, the only commonsensical response is oneness. Treat people as ourselves, or at least or better than ourselves. And whatever you have, I have, and vice versa. Everything is held in common in God's eyes.